process, publishing ethics, peer review, why articles tend to be rejected, and then raising your profile. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of the discussion, I thought I'd just take a step back and think about the beginnings of academic publishing and kind of where it comes from. And I really like this visual because I think it does a lot of work for describing that. How many of you are familiar with this site? It's called the Republic of Letters, and it's out of Stanford University. Anyone? You humanities people out there? No? This is a great site. Basically what they've done is they have been using letters that are in the collections of other entities or collecting the letters themselves, and they've been mapping correspondence of some key thinkers. So right here you've got Locke and Voltaire's correspondence over a period of time. And I think this really is a great visual representation of what happens with the publication process. Someone sends out an idea in the form of a letter of proof and says, hey, I've got this great idea. What do you think? The next person comes back and says, oh, I like this and this, but I'd cut that. And it goes back and forth. Kind of the origins of the peer review process, if you will. Now, over time, these letters or these proofs or these articles were gathered together and bound, and thus the journal was created. But the main purpose of publishing from the very beginning was an exchange of ideas, contributing to the growth of a research area or literature. Now, today is a bit different. Today we have approximately 10,000 publishers, 5,000 of which are indexed in Scopus. There are over 33,000 active English language peer-reviewed journals in the world, and there's another additional 9,400 plus non-English language journals out there. And this number traditionally grows by about 3.5% a year. These journals are publishing over 3 million articles a year, and again, that number is growing by about 3% traditionally year on year. However, those rates have accelerated in recent years because, of course, you have kind of a build-on effect here. So now it's more like 5% growth in journals and 4% growth in published articles year on year. And a lot of this has to do with R&D investment globally. A lot of emphasis on investing in research and development, and some of that trickling down to the universities. So we are seeing overall. And this, of course, leads to about 7 to 8 million researchers worldwide. And that number, of course, is a fairly broad number, and it's going to depend on how you define researcher. Some people are obviously in the private sector, some people are in universities. The interesting thing about this, when you look at all these numbers, statistically, only about 20% of those researchers are repeat authors. So a lot of people are just, publishing the first time with something associated with their dissertation, and then perhaps they go into the private sector, or they don't publish again. All right. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the article journey here. And with this slide, what I mainly want to focus on are the three versions of the article that you see on the bottom there. Throughout the talk, we will be covering all these aspects up above, from pre-submission to post-publication. But it's really important that everybody has a good understanding of these three different versions of the article, especially if you're not publishing in an open access format. So the first version here is called the author's original manuscript, or sometimes it's referred to as a preprint, more commonly these days actually. And this is the version that you're submitting for peer review. So this is your Word or LaTeX file that you're sending in for peer review. And this version you can post most anywhere. And I'm going to leave it to Sabina to talk a little bit about the preprints in her discussion. But these usually you can share quite widely. The second version is called the accepted manuscript, or the postprint. Now this version has gone through peer review, and this version might have restrictions if you're not publishing in an open access format. So at Taylor & Francis, we allow people to post this on their department website, share through LinkedIn, Facebook, and such. But you really do need to look at the journal website and the publisher website to understand what you can do with that version, depending on what publisher you're publishing with. It can't differ. And then this last version is the version of record. This is the PDF. And for journals that are not open access journals, this has a lot of restrictions. It basically should just be found on the journal website. But if you are publishing open access format, of course you can share that more widely. All right. So the first section today, I'm going to talk a little bit about choosing a journal, thinking about the best platform for your work. And obviously, in order to make the right choice about what journal you're going to publish in, you really need to take some time to think about what audience you're hoping to reach with your work. And that may change depending on the project you're working on. So you might be focused on a local community, or you might think this manuscript is really geared towards an international audience. It might at times be, that you're writing for fellow researchers. Sometimes you might be writing for practitioners, or even the general public. There's no right or wrong here. It just depends on the project you're working on. Also, you might be looking at different forms. So you might be looking at a research article, but you also might be looking at viewpoints or review articles or other forms of content. And again, that's something that you need to look at the journal you're interested in submitting to see what types of content they do accept. Right. So, first tip is to take some time to think about what that community is that you want to reach. And what I would recommend in the early starts of your process is to make that decision early on while you're getting into the writing, because that's going to help you shape the article and think about that community that you're trying to reach. One good strategy is to think about the list of journals that you want to publish in, and thinking again about the project you're working on. Make kind of a top 10 list. Number 1, we want to get in here. Number 2, we want to get in here. And as you proceed with the process, when it becomes time to submit your article, you just start at the top of the list and submit from that point on. And here's some things to consider while building your list. The first thing is taking some time to understand the journal. And the best place to start there is with the aims and scope. Every journal will have an aims and scope. It might look different depending on what publisher and website you're looking at, but there's usually going to be a statement on that landing page talking about the mission of the journal, what they're trying to achieve. And these are usually fairly small statements, but I can tell you, editors and societies spend a lot of time crafting these statements because they want to be very clear about the type of research they're interested in receiving in their journal. So do spend a lot of time looking at these aims and scope statements to understand if your work actually fits in that journal. Because the thing to keep in mind is desk rejects, which are rejects that happen at the very beginning of the process before even going out to a peer review, are on the rise. So it's probably one of the highest forms of rejection that you see. And oftentimes it's because the manuscript in question doesn't match the aims and scope of the journal, what they're trying to achieve and the type of research they're interested in publishing. Next tip. Remember that you're joining a conversation. So thinking back to that slide that I showed you early on with Locke and Voltaire and their communication, you're always joining a conversation whenever you're publishing. You're trying to forward the research and literature in your area. So some basic things to think about while you're trying to figure out where that community is that you want to be engaging with. It's a good idea to kind of keep track of key issues in your field. So you can sign up to table of content alerts for journals that you find interesting, following people on Twitter, social media, LinkedIn. LinkedIn has a lot of groups, so you can kind of type in your subject area and see if there's going to be a research group there. And you can follow along, and a lot of people are posting the research, cutting edge research and such. See where the people you really admire are publishing. So when you're reading an article, take the time to think, okay, what journal is this? And really make that connection, because obviously if you're really responding to an article, the idea is you would want to join in that conversation, responding to that article in some way, and you probably found that community. It's a good idea to talk to people that have published in the journal that you're interested, to see what the process was like, to see if they found it useful, and as well talking to the people in your own network about good forums for your research. One good way to begin into publishing initially is thinking about themed issues. A lot of times journals will publish what they call supplements or special issues, and they'll advertise for content for those. So maybe it'll be a special issue in a particular subject area that fits really well with the research that you're doing. So that's a good opportunity for you to take a chance, submit your work to that journal for that special issue. So again, take the time to kind of investigate. And beyond the aims and scope, the journal website is going to have plenty of information that will give you an idea of what is going on and what type of research they're interested in receiving. And here are just a few items that you would perhaps be interested in. I mean, the editor and editorial board is a really key indicator of what type of research they're interested in publishing. Usually when editorial boards come together and they're trying to pull in new types of research, whether that's based on subject or geography, they think, okay, we need to find somebody for the board that does this or is based here. So they're really sending signals by who is on that editorial board. So take the time to review that. Some of these other issues might or might not be important. Oftentimes they do say you can't see usage on a website, so you'll be able to see what type of activity is there. You'll be able to see citation activity too with the top cited articles. So it's just good to get in there, dig around, explore, and see what kind of information you can find. And a little bit about journal citation metrics. This is obviously an important aspect for many people when they're considering journals to publish in. Obviously the impact factor is the most used metric, and it was originally created to assess the quality of a journal. And a lot of people are very critical of it today because they see it as somewhat of a shorthand for quality, when in reality it doesn't necessarily give the whole picture of the research that's being published in that journal. And part of the criticism comes up with the fact that a lot of different disciplines have very different citation patterns. So if you compare the humanities, say, with medical sciences, you're going to see very different citation patterns that are also linked to authorship patterns, because oftentimes with humanities you have a single author, with some of the other disciplines you have multiple authors. So there's many different factors that feed into citation patterns. It's difficult to say, yeah. One more time. Yeah. Well, because some people would say that, some people would say that it's inaccurate to use the impact factor